The Galactic Academy's survival training program was known for its ruthless challenges, pushing cadets from all corners of the galaxy to their physical and mental limits. Today, the atmosphere was thick with tension as the latest group of elite cadets gathered on the bustling launch pad. Among them were representatives of various species. Tall, armored Gorgons with their thick exoskeletons glinting in the artificial light. The agile Venarians with their shimmering silver skin, and the towering, muscular Darnaxians whose deep blue eyes scanned the environment with icy precision. In the midst of this alien assembly stood Laura, the lone human cadet, slightly shorter than most, with a lean frame and piercing green eyes. Clad in the standard-issue survival gear, she seemed almost insignificant against the imposing backdrop of her fellow cadets. As the briefing commenced, Captain Zorak, a Venarian with a proud stance and an air of superiority, addressed the group. His voice was cold and precise, each word pronounced with the distinct sharpness of his kind. Today you will be deployed to Darksis 9, a swamp planet notorious for its dense fog and hostile wildlife. Your objective is simple. Navigate to the extraction point within 72 hours without the use of advanced navigation systems. You may carry personal items, but the Academy-issued tech will be limited to basic survival gear. The other cadets grunted in approval, confident in their race-specific abilities. Gorgons, known for their resilience, were already boasting about how they would crush any creature that dared cross their path. Venarians exchanged knowing glances, confident that their innate sense of spatial awareness would guarantee victory. Darnaxians, renowned for their endurance, simply smirked, unfazed by the announcement. Laura quietly adjusted the strap of her pack, not engaging in the boisterous conversation. From the corner of his eye, Zorak noticed her silence and sneered. "Human, do you think your primitive instincts will suffice on Darksis 9? Perhaps you plan to be rescued by sheer luck?" A few cadets chuckled, but Laura did not react. She knew that showing irritation would only fuel their scorn. Instead, she looked at the holographic map projected in front of the group, mentally calculating the distances. The extraction point was marked near the central marshlands, while the landing zones were scattered along the swamp's periphery. She memorized the layout, noting key features like the river bend and the dense thicket near the western zone. As the shuttle doors hissed open, the humid air of Darksis 9 engulfed them. Fog seeped into the craft, swirling around their feet like ghostly tendrils. Zorak led the team out, his posture as rigid as his confidence. Once outside, he activated his wrist device, a holographic map flickering into view. However, as soon as he tried to calibrate it, the map distorted, flickered, and then faded. Zorak's brow furrowed in confusion as he tried again, but the screen remained blank. "Magnetic interference," muttered one of the Darnaxians, running his large calloused fingers over a portable scanner. "Nothing works in this muck." Zorak cursed under his breath. "We'll move south. My instincts tell me that's the right direction." The others nodded, unquestioningly following their appointed leader. Laura lingered at the rear, pulling out her own tool, a small metallic compass. The needle spun wildly at first but slowly settled, pointing toward magnetic north. She whispered to herself, confirming her bearings. The team pushed through the dense foliage, hacking at vines and pushing past moss-covered trunks. The ground squelched under their boots, and insects the size of human hands swarmed in angry clusters. Zorak's frustration grew as they encountered one dead end after another, brackish pools, jagged root formations, and patches of toxic plants that even the Gorgons avoided. After several hours, the mood among the cadets soured. The Gorgons began to argue with the Venarians, each blaming the other for the lack of progress. Zorak ignored them, convinced that his chosen path would soon reveal a way forward. Laura, however, noticed that the sun's faint glow, barely penetrating the thick mist, seemed to be shifting. She checked her compass again and frowned. They had looped back to where they had started. Laura cleared her throat and approached Zorak cautiously. "Captain, I think we might be going in circles. The fog is playing tricks on our perception. Maybe if we used a consistent reference." Zorak cut her off with a scornful laugh. "A reference? And what would a human know of advanced navigation? Your primitive gadget is hardly reliable." "I know where we're going. I've led more missions than you've had meals, human." Laura bit her tongue, unwilling to escalate the conflict. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped rapidly, and the swamp came alive with unsettling sounds. Guttural growls, splashes, and the occasional eerie wail. The team huddled in a makeshift camp, restless and irritable. Zorak refused to admit his miscalculation, stubbornly planning to move again at dawn. Laura sat apart, carefully examining the environment. She noted the direction of the water flow, the types of plants growing along the riverbank, and the subtle changes in the wind's direction. Her instincts, honed by years of outdoor survival training on Earth, told her that they needed to move east toward higher ground. In the dim light, Rax, the Gorgon, who had remained mostly silent, approached her. "Human," he rumbled, his deep voice cautious. "Do you truly think we are lost?" Laura looked up, meeting his curious gaze. "Yes, I think we've been moving in circles because the fog distorts our perception. We need a stable reference, and I believe the river might help guide us. Water usually flows from higher elevations. If we follow it upstream, we might find the ridge shown on the map." Rax nodded slowly, his massive hands flexing as if testing the idea. "Your compass, does it still work?" Laura held it out, the needle unwaveringly pointing north. Rax grunted in approval. "Zorak won't listen to you, he's too proud. But I've seen you, calm, observant. I'll follow your lead if you find a way." Laura felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps not all the cadets were blinded by pride. She glanced back at Zorak, who remained stubbornly focused on his holographic map. Tomorrow, she decided, she would convince the others that survival meant embracing practical solutions, even if they came from a human. The fog hung heavy over the swamp, thickening like a smothering blanket as the cadets stirred awake. Cold, damp air clung to their skin, and the chill gnawed through their gear. Zorak paced near the edge of the makeshift camp, his jaw clenched and eyes narrowed. The holographic map on his wrist device continued to malfunction, displaying nothing but a static-filled screen. The Venerian captain punched the device in frustration, his irritation palpable. The other cadets watched him silently, their confidence in his leadership slowly eroding. Laura sat apart from the group, cradling her compass in her hand. The needle remained steady, unwaveringly pointing north. She glanced toward the darkened sky, where the pale outline of Darksis IX's twin moons was barely visible through the fog. The planet's surface remained a maze of shifting shadows and faint, ominous sounds. Growls from unseen creatures, the splash of something heavy moving through the water, the rustling of unseen wings. Rax, the Gorgon, stretched his massive arms and moved to sit beside Laura. The ground trembled slightly as he lowered himself, his bulk making the moss-covered earth quiver. "You said we're lost?" he rumbled, his deep voice hushed. Laura nodded, eyes fixed on the compass. "We've been moving in circles. The fog distorts everything, and Zorak won't listen." Rax's nostrils flared as he cast a wary glance toward the Venarian captain, who now barked orders to the other cadets. Zorak was instructing the team to pack up and follow him toward what he insisted was the extraction point. Several cadets, exhausted and disoriented, grumbled under their breath. The tension was palpable. "Why won't he listen?" Rax muttered, his fists clenching. "His arrogance blinds him," Laura sighed, tucking the compass back into her pack. "Because he thinks a human can't possibly know better than him. He's been leading missions for years. I'm just a cadet from a so-called primitive planet." Rax's brow furrowed. "Your instinct seems sharper than his gadgets." Before Laura could respond, Zorak's voice echoed through the clearing. "Move out. We head south." Laura stiffened. South was the direction they had come from, the same path they had already traversed twice. She rose to her feet, glancing at Rax, who nodded slightly. Together they followed the group, moving through the dense foliage with the fog pressing down like a suffocating shroud. The ground beneath their feet squelched with every step, and the swamp's pungent stench filled their nostrils, an overpowering mix of decaying plant matter and stagnant water. Alien insects, with translucent wings and serrated legs, buzzed around them, biting at exposed skin. The Darnaxians slapped at the creatures with irritation, their tough blue skin offering little protection against the relentless swarm. Zorak marched at the front, his shoulders tense, eyes darting from left to right as if searching for some invisible landmark. The path grew more treacherous as they advanced, the ground sloping downward into a murky basin filled with dark, murky water. The mist thickened, swirling around them like a living thing, and the sounds of unseen creatures echoed through the air. Low growls, splashes, the eerie croaking of some unseen predator. Suddenly, one of the Vingarians slipped, his foot sinking into a seemingly solid patch of ground. The earth gave way, and he cried out as he was pulled downward. Laura spun around, eyes widening as she watched him disappear up to his waist in the thick, sucking mud. "Help! I can't move!" the Venerian shouted, his silver skin glistening with sweat as he struggled to free himself. Jorok rushed forward, grabbing the Venarian's arm and pulling with all his strength, but the mud tightened its grip, dragging the cadet down inch by inch. Panic spread through the group. The other cadets frozen in place, eyes wide with fear. Laura's mind raced. Without thinking, she dropped her pack and ran toward the struggling Venerian. She pulled a length of rope from her pack and tied one end around a sturdy root protruding from the ground. The other end she tossed toward the sinking cadet. "Grab it!" she shouted. The Venerian's trembling hands clutched the rope, his silver eyes filled with desperation. Laura braced herself, digging her heels into the ground and pulling with all her strength. The mud resisted, as if reluctant to release its prey, but slowly, inch by agonizing inch, the Venerian began to emerge. Rax joined her, his massive arms adding to the force. Together they pulled until the Venerian was free, collapsing onto solid ground with a gasp of relief. Mud caked his lower body, and his chest heaved with labored breaths. Jork's jaw clenched, his eyes dark. "We keep moving," he snapped, ignoring the cadet's weakened state. "The extraction point is close." Laura rose to her feet, her breathing heavy, her muscles aching. "We're not going south, we're going in circles." Jorshak's eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning my orders, human?" "Yes," Laura said, her voice steady. "Look around you. The same trees, the same rock formations. We passed them an hour ago. The fog is playing tricks on our minds. If we keep going this way, we'll end up right back where we started." Jorik's fists clenched. "And what would you suggest, human? Use your little toy compass and lead us to safety?" Laura met his glare, unflinching. "At least the compass doesn't lie." Before Zorak could respond, a deafening roar echoed through the swamp. The ground trembled, and the trees shuddered. The cadets tensed, eyes darting toward the source of the sound. A massive, hulking creature emerged from the fog. A swamp-dwelling predator with glistening scales and rows of serrated teeth. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its jaws snapped hungrily. Jorok drew his weapon, a sleek energy blade that hummed with lethal energy. "Form up!" he shouted. "Prepare to fight!" The cadets scrambled to draw their weapons, forming a shaky defensive line, but Laura didn't move. Instead, she scanned the area, her mind racing. The creature was massive, but its movements were sluggish, its eyes unfocused. It was blind. "Stay still," Laura shouted. "It hunts by sound. Don't make a move." Zorik ignored her, charging forward with his blade raised high. The creature roared again, swinging its massive tail in a wide arc. The tail connected with Zorik's chest, sending him flying backward into the mud. The other cadets gasped, some taking hesitant steps backward. Laura gritted her teeth, gripping her rope. "Rax! Distract it! Make a sound!" "Loud and clear!" Rax hesitated, but the urgency in Laura's eyes spurred him into action. He grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it against a tree. The loud crash echoed through the swamp, drawing the creature's attention. It turned, jaws snapping, in the direction of the noise. Laura seized the opportunity, wrapping the rope around a low-hanging branch. With a quick knot, she created a makeshift snare, positioning it near the creature's legs. "Now!" she shouted. Rax threw another rock, this time behind the creature. It spun around, stepping directly into the snare. Laura yanked the rope, pulling it tight. The creature stumbled, its legs ensnared, and with a final, furious roar, it collapsed into the mud. The cadets stared in stunned silence as the beast lay immobilized, thrashing weakly against its restraints. Zorak struggled to his feet, clutching his side where the creature's tail had struck. His eyes met Laura's, filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Laura straightened, her expression firm. "If we keep following you, we'll all end up like that creature. Blind, lost, and trapped." It's time to find another way. The air hung heavy with a stifling, suffocating tension. The massive predator, now ensnared and immobilized by Laura's makeshift trap, continued to thrash against the ropes. Its scales gleamed like wet obsidian under the foggy light, each movement sending ripples through the mud. The cadets remained frozen in place, eyes wide, breaths shallow, as they watched the beast struggle. Zorak stood apart, clutching his side, his jaw clenched in a mixture of pain and humiliation. His eyes, once filled with arrogant confidence, now burned with frustration and barely concealed anger. Laura remained still, her eyes locked onto the creature, watching its muscles twitch and contract as it tried to free itself. Its tail lashed violently, splattering mud across the group. Rax moved closer to her, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the ground. "What now?" Rax rumbled, his deep voice a low, cautious whisper. Laura's mind raced, analyzing the situation. The creature was blind, driven solely by sound and vibrations. If it managed to break free, the consequences would be catastrophic. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. "We need to keep it contained," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "If it breaks loose, it'll tear through the group. Rax, can you keep the others back? Make sure no one gets too close." Rax nodded, his gaze shifting toward the cadets, who remained huddled together in a tight cluster. Some murmured among themselves, glancing nervously at Zorak, who remained hunched over, breathing heavily. Laura stepped forward, moving carefully to avoid drawing the creature's attention. Each step was calculated, each movement slow and deliberate. The mud sucked at her boots, threatening to pull her down, but she pressed on, her eyes never leaving the creature's writhing form. Suddenly the beast lunged, its jaws snapping inches away from Laura's leg. She stumbled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. The rope strained, the knots tightening as the creature thrashed harder. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and a low, rumbling growl echoed through the swamp. "Laura!" Rax called out, his fists clenched, ready to intervene. "I'm fine," she said quickly, steadying herself, "but we need to reinforce the ropes. It's too strong." From behind them, Zorak staggered forward, his eyes blazing. "You!" he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Laura. "You put us all in danger with your reckless actions. You think tying up a swamp predator is the solution? You think you know better than me?" Laura met his glare, her jaw set. "If I hadn't acted, it would have killed you." Zorak's fists clenched, and his chest rose and fell with heavy, labored breaths. "You undermined my authority," he said, his voice a dangerous growl. "I am the captain here. You will follow my orders or face the consequences." Rax moved between them, his massive frame creating a barrier. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Arguing won't get us out of here. We need to focus on surviving." Zorak's eyes narrowed, his gaze darting from Rax to Laura. His pride was a fragile, wounded thing now, and the humiliation of being outsmarted by a human simmered beneath his skin like a festering wound. Laura turned away from him, her attention returning to the creature. Its struggles were growing weaker, its breaths coming in heavy, labored pants. The ropes held, but only just. If the creature managed to free itself, the group would have no chance against it. "Rax," she said, her voice calm and steady, "I need your strength. We're going to tighten the ropes. If we can keep it pinned, it might exhaust itself." Rax nodded, moving to her side. Together they grasped the rope, pulling it taut, forcing the creature's limbs closer to its body. The beast roared, its jaw snapping at the air, but its movements were slower now, its energy waning. Zorak stood off to the side, his hands clenched into fists. He watched as the cadets gravitated toward Laura, following her instructions without hesitation. The sting of being disregarded in favor of a human gnawed at him like a parasite. Laura's gaze flicked toward Zorak, catching the dark, angry look in his eyes. She knew that look. She had seen it in countless other cadets who refused to accept her competence, who saw her as nothing more than a primitive human with no place among the elite. But she couldn't worry about Zorak now. The immediate danger still loomed large, and the swamp continued to close in around them, the fog thickening, the air growing colder. "Everyone," Laura called out, her voice carrying over the group. "We need to keep moving. Staying here is too dangerous. The creature is weakening, but it won't stay down forever." Zorak's jaw clenched tighter. the muscles in his neck straining. "You don't get to give orders," he said, his voice a venomous hiss. Laura met his gaze head-on, her green eyes unflinching. "Then you give them," she said, her voice sharp and cold, "but do it fast, because the longer we wait, the worse this is going to get." Zorak opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a deafening crash echoed through the swamp. The ground trembled, and the air vibrated with the force of the impact. The creature lunged again, its body twisting violently against the ropes. The knots strained, fibers fraying as the beast struggled with renewed vigor. "Everyone back!" Laura shouted, grabbing the end of the rope and pulling with all her strength. Rax moved to her side, bracing his massive legs against the ground and adding his considerable strength to the effort. The beast thrashed, its jaws snapping dangerously close to Rax's arm. Zorak watched, his fists clenched, his face twisted in a mask of fury and frustration. The other cadets huddled together, eyes wide, expressions filled with fear. Laura's muscles burned, her arms shaking as she struggled to keep the rope tight. Sweat dripped down her brow, mingling with the mud splattered across her face. Her vision blurred, her breaths coming in sharp, painful bursts. The creature roared again, its body slumping against the ground, its energy finally depleted. The swamp fell into a heavy, oppressive silence, the only sound the ragged breathing of the exhausted cadets. Laura released the rope, her arms trembling as she sank to her knees, gasping for air. Rax moved to her side, his massive hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice a low rumble. Laura shook her head, her eyes fixed on the still form of the creature. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "If Zor keeps leading us in circles, we'll never get out of here." Rax's jaw tightened, his dark eyes flicking toward Zorak, who stood apart from the group, his back turned, his shoulders rigid. "He won't step down," Rax said, his voice heavy with certainty. "Then I'll have to make him," Laura said, her voice a quiet, determined whisper. The fog clung to the swamp like a suffocating shroud, wrapping around the cadets as they huddled together in the clearing. The creature remained bound, its massive body twitching in exhaustion, its breath coming in slow, labored huffs. The ropes strained against its immense bulk, each knot stretched to its limit. Laura stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest, eyes fixed on Zorak. The Venerian captain paced back and forth, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out like taut cables. Rax moved to Laura's side, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the ground. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Laura's gaze didn't waver from Zorak. "He won't listen to reason," she said, her voice calm but firm. "He's too proud to admit he's lost. If we keep following him, we'll end up back at the starting point, or worse." Rax's jaw tightened, his fists flexing at his sides. "He's a fool," he said, his eyes dark, "but he's still the captain. The others won't go against him." Laura's eyes narrowed as Zorak barked out another command, ordering the cadets to gather their supplies and prepare to move out. The other cadets obeyed without question, their faces weary and drawn. Zorak's injuries from the creature's attack hadn't slowed him down, but they had certainly unbalanced his temper. His movements were sharp and jerky, his voice a strained growl as he spoke. Laura stepped forward, her boots sinking into the mud. "Zorak," she said, her voice carrying over the clearing, "you're leading us in circles. We need to change direction." Zorak whirled around, his dark eyes blazing. "You do not give orders here, human," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "I am the captain. I decide where we go." Laura held her ground, her chin raised. "And where have you led us so far?" "Straight into the belly of a swamp predator. We're nowhere near the extraction point. Your devices aren't working. Your direction is wrong." Zorak's fists clenched, his jaw twitching. "You think you know better than me? You, a human with a primitive compass and a rope?" Laura's expression remained calm, her eyes steady. "Yes," she said simply. "I know how to get us out of here." The other cadets shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Laura and Zorak. The tension was thick, palpable, a tangible force pressing down on them. Rax stepped forward, his massive arms crossed over his chest. "Laura's right," he said, his voice a deep, resonant boom. "We're lost. Zorak's way isn't working." Zorakot's gaze snapped to Rax, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You're taking her side?" he demanded, his voice a low, furious growl. Rax met Zorak's glare without flinching. "I'm taking the side that keeps us alive," he said. Zorak's face twisted in rage, his hands trembling at his sides. The Venarian captain was on the verge of losing control, his ego and authority crumbling beneath the weight of Laura's defiance. Laura stepped closer, closing the distance between herself and Zorak. "Your way isn't working," she said, her voice firm. "And deep down, you know it. You just can't admit it. But every minute we waste here, we're getting closer to nightfall. And when night comes, this swamp will become a hunting ground." George's nostrils flared, his chest heaving with each angry breath. "You think you're so smart," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. "You think you can lead this team better than me?" Laura's eyes flashed. "I don't think. I know." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. The other cadets watched in stunned silence, their breaths held, their muscles tense. Zorak's fists clenched tighter, his knuckles white. And then, without warning, he lunged at Laura. Laura reacted instinctively, stepping to the side as Zorak's fist sailed past her face. She grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back and shoving him forward. Zorak stumbled, his boots slipping in the mud, but he recovered quickly, spinning around and aiming another wild punch at her. Laura ducked, her hands moving with fluid precision as she grabbed Zorak's wrist, twisting it sharply. Zorak grunted in pain, his face contorted with fury, but he refused to back down. He lunged again, his movements wild and uncontrolled. Laura sidestepped, using his own momentum to throw him off balance. Zorak crashed into a nearby tree, the impact sending a shockwave through his body. He fell to his knees, breathing heavily, his chest heaving with exertion. Laura stepped back, her breathing steady, her fists clenched at her sides. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice calm, almost cold. Zorak's head snapped up, his dark eyes blazing with fury. "You will regret this," he spat, his voice a venomous hiss. Laura shook her head, her expression hardened. "I already do," she said, her voice firm. "But I'm not going to let your ego get us killed." Rax stepped forward, his gaze locked on Zorak. "You're not fit to lead," he said, his voice a deep, rumbling growl. "Not anymore." Zorak's face twisted with rage, but he said nothing. His fists remained clenched at his sides, his eyes glaring daggers at Laura. Laura turned to the rest of the cadets, her expression fierce. "We're heading east," she said, her voice carrying over the clearing. "The compass is working and the river flows eastward. If we follow it, we'll reach higher ground and get a clearer view of the terrain. We can regroup and plan our next move from there." The cadets glanced at one another, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Zorak remained on his knees, mud dripping down his face, his jaw clenched in silent rage. Rax nodded, his massive shoulders squared. "I'm with you," he said, his deep voice steady. One by one, the cadets stepped forward, moving to Laura's side. The Gorgons, the Venarians, the Darnaxians, all of them lined up behind her, their eyes resolute. Zorak pushed himself to his feet, his chest rising and falling with heavy, furious breaths. "You're making a mistake," he snarled, his eyes fixed on Laura. "You're going to get them killed." Laura met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "Better to take a chance than stay lost in your delusions," she said, her voice cold and firm. "Now move aside." Zorak's jaw twitched, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. But he said nothing. He stepped back, his dark eyes burning with a dangerous, simmering fury. Laura turned away from him, her shoulders squared, her chin held high. She moved to the front of the group, her compass in hand, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. The fog remained thick, swirling around them like a living entity, but Laura's steps were steady, each stride filled with purpose and determination. Behind her, the cadets followed in silence, their expressions grim, their eyes forward. Zorak remained at the back of the group, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. Laura tightened her grip on the compass, the cold metal pressing into her palm. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, the ground uneven and treacherous. But she moved forward with unwavering resolve. If Georges refused to lead them, she would, and she would get them out alive. The fog pressed down like a heavy, suffocating blanket, its dense white tendrils coiling through the trees and hanging thick over the cadets as they trudged forward. The swamp's uneven terrain slowed their progress, each step a struggle through ankle-deep mud and tangled roots. The air was thick with the stench of decaying plants and stagnant water, and the distant cries of unseen creatures echoed ominously through the fog. Laura led the group, her eyes fixed on the compass clutched tightly in her hand. The needle pointed east, unwavering and steady. Behind her, the cadets moved in a ragged line, their shoulders slumped, faces drawn and weary. Rax walked closest to Laura, his massive frame towering over the others. His eyes scanned the surroundings, muscles tensed, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. Zorak lingered at the back of the group, his eyes dark and brooding, his jaw set in a hard, unyielding line. Mud caked his uniform, and the bruises on his cheek and jaw had begun to swell, a stark reminder of his failed attempt to overpower Laura. He said nothing as they moved forward, but his gaze remained fixed on Laura's back, his eyes filled with a simmering resentment that burned like a slow, relentless fire. The ground began to slope upward, the mud thinning to patches of slick grass and tangled vines. Laura kept her eyes on the compass, her breaths coming in slow, controlled rhythms. The swamp was growing quieter, the distant animal calls fading into an eerie, unsettling silence. Rax leaned closer to Laura, his voice a low rumble. How much farther? Laura's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the faint outline of a rocky ridge loomed through the mist. "We're close," she said, her voice firm. "Once we reach higher ground, we'll get a better view of the terrain. The extraction point should be visible from there." Rax nodded, his jaw set in determination. Behind them, a Gorgon cadet stumbled, his foot catching on a vine. He cursed under his breath, his face flushed with frustration. Zorag stepped past him without a word, his eyes still fixed on Laura. The ridge grew steeper, the ground littered with sharp rocks and fallen branches. Laura moved with deliberate care, her boots crunching against the gravel as she led the way. The air was colder here, a biting wind whipping through the trees and sending shivers down the cadets' spines. Rax moved closer to Laura, his eyes scanning the path ahead. "You sure this is the right way?" Laura nodded, her jaw clenched. "It has to be. The compass hasn't failed yet." But as they climbed higher, the fog thickened, closing in around them like a living entity. The path grew narrower, the rocks slick with moisture. The wind howled through the ridge, carrying with it the distant roar of some unseen predator. Laura's heart hammered in her chest, her muscles tense and aching. Her grip on the compass tightened, the cold metal biting into her palm. The ridge continued to rise, each step bringing them closer to the summit and, hopefully, to safety. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. Laura spun around, her eyes wide. One of the Darnaxian cadets, a slender figure with dark blue skin, was sliding down the slope, his boots slipping against the slick rocks. His arms flailed wildly, fingers clawing at the ground as he fought to find purchase. "Help!" he cried, his voice high and panicked. "I can't." Rax was already moving, his massive legs pounding against the ground as he rushed to the cadet's side. He dropped to his knees, his hands reaching for the cadet's outstretched arm. The ground shifted beneath them, loose rocks tumbling down the slope with each frantic movement. Laura scrambled forward, her heart racing. "Rax, hold on!" Rax gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he pulled the cadet upward. The Darnaxian's eyes were wide with fear, his hands trembling as he clung to Rax's arm. The ground beneath them gave a violent lurch, a crack splitting through the ridge. "Move!" Laura shouted, her voice cutting through the wind. Rax heaved the cadet upward, dragging him to solid ground just as the ledge crumbled beneath them, sending rocks and debris plummeting into the abyss below. The cadet collapsed against the ground, gasping for breath, his face pale and drawn. Rax knelt beside him, his chest heaving, sweat pouring down his brow. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough. "You're okay." Laura turned away, her eyes scanning the ridge. The summit was closer now, the rocky outcropping just a few meters away. The wind roared through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the distant rumble of thunder. "Come on," she said, her voice firm. "We're almost there." The group moved forward, their steps slow and heavy. Zorak trailed behind, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides, his eyes narrowed to slits as he watched Laura lead the group. The summit loomed closer, the fog thinning as they ascended. Laura's heart pounded in her chest, her muscles burning with each step. And then, finally, they emerged onto the plateau. The view was breathtaking. The ridge dropped away into a vast expanse of swamp and dense forest, the trees stretching out like a sea of green below. In the distance, a metallic glint caught Laura's eye, the extraction point, a sleek silver structure perched atop a distant hill. "There," Laura said, pointing. "That's our way out," the cadets murmured in relief, their eyes brightening with newfound hope. Rax clapped a heavy hand on Laura's shoulder, his smile wide and genuine. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Laura's shoulders sagged with relief, a tired smile spreading across her face. But as she turned to face the group, her gaze met Zorax. The Venerian captain stood apart from the others, his fists clenched, his eyes dark and unreadable. Laura stepped toward him, her expression hard. "You don't have to like me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But you need to accept that your way almost got us all killed." Jork's jaw tightened, his dark eyes blazing. "This isn't over," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You may have led them out of the swamp, but you haven't proven anything." Laura met his gaze head-on, her chin raised, her eyes fierce. "Survival is proof enough," she said. Jor said nothing. He turned away, his shoulders tense, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. Laura watched him go, her fists clenched at her sides. She knew the conflict between them wasn't over, but for now the group was safe, the extraction point was in sight, and she had proven to herself and to the others that her instincts, her courage, and her primitive tools were enough to lead them to safety. The wind howled through the ridge, carrying with it the scent of victory, the weight of survival, and the unspoken promise that this trial was only